Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today is a Q&A with some very leisurely people. Our topic is time. Our participants have watched the podcast in the Time series, which you can see or listen to at my website, drchris.life. I'll do a quick summary now of part 2, Regaining the Pleasure of Leisure, before we go into our Q&A. Time affluence is the subjective sense of having enough time to do all the things we want to do. It's a sense that we're in charge of our time and our attention. And we know that having this sense of enough time is extraordinarily beneficial. So how do we develop it? Well, it's not about having an abundance of free time. In fact, having too much leisure time can lower well-being. Well, first, we can try to free up actual time in the day. We could all start with reducing time pursuing clickbait on the internet or doom scrolling on social feeds when we have small gaps throughout the day. Or we can reduce the proportion of time confetti we experience each day. A simple rule is to place in your calendar some blocks of uninterrupted time each day and to engage in what Cal Newport calls deep work. We can also make strategic time-saving purchases, whether that's in terms of paying others to do things to free up our time, paying someone to mow your lawn or wash your car, etc. Finally, we could use our time confetti, these little pieces of time spread throughout the day, more deliberately. You might have to hand a list of things like quick to-do tasks, like calling a friend or, in my case, doing a short podcast or doing some star jumps and so on. We can also practice subjective strategies for time affluence. So even very short mindfulness exercises can increase perceived time affluence, as can building in short breaks throughout the day or having clear rituals and boundaries for transitions between work and non-work. We can also cultivate a mindset that values time at least as much as money. We may then decide strategically to spend less so that we can spend less time at work. The key is prioritising happiness and satisfaction and intentionally increasing and enjoying leisure time. Our sense of time affluence also increases when we spend time benevolently on others. It seems such altruistic behaviour boosts our self-esteem and self-confidence, and this calm feeling seems to slow down time in our minds. Well, that's enough by way of summary, because there's so much to discuss, I think, around leisure and regaining the pleasure of it. And to that end, I welcome my guests, my leisurely guests. I mean that in the most positive way. As always, I'm interested in your insights into this, I think, highly topical area, this idea of how we can relax and actually enjoy our leisure. Now, who might we start with? I think I might start with Mr. Norwood. Chris, I'm always interested in what's happening in your febrile mind, that very active cranium of yours.
So what was rattling around in my brain for both this one and the one before, in fact, is let's call it like the social layer that applies across these.
Yeah.
I mean, more broadly, the way that like our place in a social fabric might influence our perceptions around productivity, but also leisure time, right? And so I guess where I'm going with that is that, like, we feel like we have expectations imposed from others to be productive, and if we don't live up to those expectations, do we give off the perception of being lazy? And relatedly, when we think about specifically leisure time, one of that reframe away from that being, the perception of that being that you're lazy, and more like you're just making full use and appreciating all of the time that you have. And but also when you prioritize leisure, around others who might not be prioritizing leisure, they then possibly get frustrated and look at you as saying, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing all this stuff over here. And you're just, and it's like, well, actually, I'm doing a lot of other stuff over here. I'm just trying to also make sure that I'm being thoughtful about my time. And so how, even if we can, as individuals, think about this as, a reclaim of our leisure time and reframing the way that we think about it, how can we navigate that also when there's the expectations of the world around us that feed into that?
That's fantastic. So I think you correctly sort of parsed it into two issues. What one is, how do we regain the pleasure of leisure, but then also how are we going to navigate the social world, particularly people who may look negatively upon our leisureliness, if I put it that way. So I might start with the second one. The first thing is the second one is like a projection or a belief or an opinion about what other people might be thinking. And so sometimes I think you're right. It will be people would be maybe thinking we're lazy, but I think most of the time people are much more interested in themselves.
Yeah.
Like that. We massively overestimate how much people care about what we're doing. All right. People are closer to us, maybe not, because they're more intertwined. But I still think there is a point here, and that is that there is a kind of cultural value on busyness, and people will. It depends. For example, like if you're in a workplace and you're surrounded by people who are absolutely flat strapped, they're working super hard, and you appear to be sort of very leisurely. They may have a sense of unfairness. All right. And even if in your more leisurely, we might say more mindful, less feverish activity, you're perfectly highly productive, they still might have this sense in which there's something not right here. So, how does one deal with that? It's an interesting question. I mean, it's if you think about it, it's a general question. I was talking to someone yesterday, coaching someone who is been elevated to a more senior leadership role, and she's having to deal with basically a guy that she leapfrogged, and she has effectively stopped his progression because she's so talented. It's so he hates her, and he's in a very sneaky way spreading poison about her. Right now, how does this relate to what you're talking about? She can't. She finds it very painful that there is a person in her proximity with a very negative view of her who's spreading that view. Objectively, she's in a much more powerful position. She's got the whole backing of the organisation. Her boss is totally on top of all of this. She's getting coaching by me, but we're very hardwired to feel this, right? And so that your question then is, well, how do I deal with someone who no matter what I do, is going to have this negative view of me, right? And this is so deep in our wiring, like if you're living in the Stone Age village and someone's got a negative view of you, you've got to do something about it. It feels like it because you don't want them turning the village against you, right? But the situation you're talking about, where now you're not living in a village with people and it doesn't actually matter that much. So we've got to work against our wiring. And this is where mindfulness and generally emotional intelligence comes into play, where we have an understanding of what's actually playing out. we keep recognizing it and dropping back into, oh, it's okay. So it's a kind of discipline over time. Oh, that's my Stone Age wiring firing off. It doesn't really mean anything in this situation. Thanks for warning me. And dropping back and shifting attention, I'm okay. So it's a iterative over time, the same sort of EQ skill, and gradually you begin to not respond with the same degree of concern. All right. And I guess that sort of applies to the first part of your question too, about how do we learn to remember or relearn how to enjoy our leisure. And it's probably by that going, oh yeah, look at that. I'm worrying about XYZ instead of enjoying the feeling of the sun on my skin, or or whatever we're doing for leisure. It's noticing it, taking a nice deep breath and going, I'm allowed to. It's actually a good thing to enjoy the world. And repeat. You do that like a couple of thousand times, and it wires it in through neuroplasticity. So I think it's, knowledge is also is always the foundation for liberation, but then there's practice of the wisdom of that knowledge to begin to instantiate it. So it automaticizes in our brain and in our whole body, our nervous system and our endocrine systems, so that we feel that we can relax as well as just think it. Yeah. That was fabulous. I didn't know where that was going to go. That's great. Who's next? Mm-hmm.
I think what sticks out is emotional intelligence. I love that. I think there are some incredibly bright people in this world, and people who are needing to work on that a little bit. And I think that having that time and having that space is really, really crucial.
Yes. Okay, let's just tease that one apart. Maybe people watching this might be wondering what we mean when we talk about emotional intelligence. So it might be useful just to start there. When I think about it, I just sort of think about it as intelligence applied to our emotions, right? Whereas I think others have a slightly different view. They think there's a kind of intelligence that is like an emotional intelligence, all right? And so let's just pull those apart so we can start with at least some clarity about what we're talking about. Very often very bright people don't pay much attention to their own emotions or the emotions of others, right? So intelligence is very, very important. Don't get me wrong. The higher the intelligence, the more one is likely to surmount something, right? But yeah, okay. This is going to be a deep dive, Colleen. So there's a lot of research evidence, for example, that the more intelligent you are, the harder it is for people to dissuade you from, a poor course of action or a poor moral decision. And so I just need to back away a little bit and say, well, why would that be the case? All of us, the way our brains and our whole body is designed, we process the world emotionally first. All right. So our cognitive system is like this sort of, it's got all these like shortcuts, heuristics, things that natural selection selected because we can't possibly process everything fully cognitively and using the frontal lobes. So we've got all these biases and heuristics, and the sum total of that is the way we think. And so there's massive processing going on unconsciously, and then we simplify it with these heuristics. For example, the bandwagon effect is one. There's many, but if everyone else is doing something, there's probably a good reason why. So I'll do it too. Right? There must be value in it. And generally speaking, that's not. It's a rough rule, but it's okay. All right. And so, but what gets signaled to us for our conscious mind to work on is a feeling. I like this. I don't like that. I want to do this. I don't want to do that. Right. And so that feeling then is sort of rationalized and justified by our conscious mind. The frontal lobes kick in and provide us reasons why what we feel is correct. And the more intelligent you are, the better you are at that rationalizing. Your inner lawyer wins the argument with other people and with yourself. Right? So now back to your question, emotional intelligence. So intelligence is not just enough per se, because often it creates even more problems. What we need is an understanding of the way we're constructed, in the way I've just been describing, and then applying that intelligence to earlier stages of our thinking and feeling, to recognize I've got these emotional biases. Right? So how do we apply it to enjoying leisure? So you're sitting on the said beach in lovely warm conditions, and you're noticing you're finding it hard to relax because you're worrying about something you've got to do at work in a couple of days' time. All right? And but you recognize that you recognize this feeling is inappropriate for this circumstance. And you pick it up and you say, I'm going to pay attention to you tomorrow morning. And you take it out of the mind and you take a breath and you relax, right? But it's the using the intelligence to get at those very fast emotions that sneak in before we've had a chance to think, recognizing it as such, and then shifting attention again, right? So it's not as easy as we think to just relax, especially when what's been practiced in and inculcated from a societal level is you mustn't relax. You must be always on. And even in our leisure now, you must always be on. And everything's got to be quick. Everything now YouTube's all shorts. Workshops are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. There's a problem here, but that's a whole other issue. Fantastic, thank you, Colleen. Did that make sense? I know I rambled a bit about EQ. Okay, fantastic. That leaves the other two fine, timely people.
I'm going to keep this short because you might run out of time. Funny
yes.
Enough. But I love the thought of spending time with others or on others effectively stretches time within inside your like mind. I just found that fascinating. Nothing really to talk about except that it's fascinating.
Yes. And I think the next podcast I want to write is largely about that. It's about experiences in meditation, experiences of awe. But I think generally there's this feeling that if we calm down, like if we've got feelings of high self-esteem or feelings of confidence, it switches on the parasympathetic nervous system. Everything quietens down. The fight-flight system's off. And when that happens, there's more spaciousness. One of the most commonly reported things when people do find some quiet in meditation is that time seems to stretch. I think it's the same when we're feeling connected and pleasant feelings towards people. Time seems to stretch. Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's a beautiful thing, and it really speaks to that subjective aspect. Fantastic. And Karen, what's lurking there?
Well, something that hopefully you could dive a little bit deeper into is that 1-3-5 rule. So I think I'm an expert in the 5 area, like focusing on the small things. Well, that's only going to take me 5 minutes. That's only going to take me 10 minutes. So like this mindset of if I tackle all these small things, it'll create more time for big things. But in reality, that never happens. In the vein of like creating time for leisure. But I was just curious if you could speak a little bit more to.
Yes, I'm happy to. Yeah, so the 1-3-5 rule is just, it's just a bit of a rubric, but it's the idea is that when you're planning a day, sort of 1 big thing, 3 moderate things, and 5 little things for most people would be plenty. But you're speaking about the sort of psychology of many little things, and there's this feeling like if I just get all the little things done and clear the space, then I can really focus and concentrate on the bigger things. All right. And usually doesn't work out. All right. Now, first off, what's driving that behavior? Well, it's procrastination, because procrastination is basically an avoidance technique. It's an attempt at self-regulation, specifically regulating our anxiety or our fears of something. So if you've got something big and important and it's deep and it's going to be hard, it's natural to kind of go, it'd be nicer to do something easy. All right. And then we kid ourselves, I've done 5 things. Or maybe you end up doing 100 small things in the day, and you get to the end of the day and you kid yourself and you say, I've been very productive. Right? But no, because in terms of importance, it's the big things, right? And what most people, I think, land on as a practical solution here is to do the big things first rather than the small things, because you can do the small things even when you're a bit tired so for most people, the morning's a better time to do big things because just their brain is more rejuvenated. And you can do the small stuff with not full cognitive, grunt. All right. So, yeah, but that's a procrastination thing. All right. And I'm not sure how it relates to leisure, but we could probably twist it towards that, but we don't need to. It's an important question in its own right.
Creating time for leisure, using those tools to create time to
That's
relax.
True. Actually, that's a really good point, because I reckon people would feel better about having leisure if they got 1 big thing done and, say, 2 medium things done in a day rather than 20 small bits, knowing that they still haven't done the big thing. I think you're right. I think that would free up most people's minds so they can go, I've earned this. But there's a sneaking suspicion when we've only done little piddly things all day that we haven't earned our leisure. I mean it's silly thinking, but I kind of get it. Yeah. All right, guys. You never disappoint. Thank you so much. And I look forward to our next Q&A. I'm thinking it might be around the experience of awe and meditation and how that affects our sense of time, which I think will be fascinating if and when I write it. Okay, guys, take care.